Hey everybody, it's Durger time. Welcome back to our weekly recap of the dev journals for the upcoming release from Grey Dog Software, Total Extreme Wrestling 9. With the public demo being released next Saturday, July 27th, and the full release on August 3rd, we are in the home stretch for those recaps. But things are still going fast and steady with some interesting new updates to the long-running series. If you're liking these dev journal breakdowns, think about taking a second to like the video, and if you haven't, subscribe if you're excited for future TEW9 content. We're going to be doing a lot on this channel, so make sure you're being notified, make sure you're aware. Best way to do that, subscribe to the channel. All that out of the way, let's get into it. Day 11 starts us off with sort of a theme that's been going on in these dev journals for the new game, which I am thrilled with. It's everything that I've been looking for is kind of being hinted at as least as an evolutionary step in the direction that I want the series to go. And that next update was relationships. So the relationship system already existed in the game, but now it's been completely overhauled. It's making it much deeper, more realistic. According to the dev journal here, instead of each relationship being limited to a single type, each is now being divided into 4 distinct parts. You have family relationships, personal relationships, romantic relationships, and mentor and protege relationships. The new system allows for more complex dynamics, as you could have a multifaceted relationship. The game calculates whether a relationship is considered positive or negative based upon different factors, which are weighted in different ways, and can also focus on one specific element if the context makes that more appropriate. So some of these breakdowns, obviously, we used to have just a flat relationship status. Now you have really specific subsets. So family relationship, you can not just pick their family, but say they're a sibling, they're a parent, they're a cousin, grandparent, aunt, uncle, distant relative. Personal relationship, they're a friend, friendships, deep friendships. So there's a ton of different little nuances in the relationship system, and they all work differently and are weighted differently. On top of all of the above changes, relationships are also now deeper in the way they evolve. There are hidden values behind the scenes that keep track of the interactions between two people, and it is these that govern whether a relationship type changes. The example they provide, they have 2 people with a mutual respect personal relationship might have several positive backstage encounters before they build up enough points to trigger the move up to friendship, with any negative interaction obviously taking away points to that calculus in the meantime. Of course, there are also incidents and interactions that immediately give a ton of points that can lead to a quick change when appropriate. The system therefore means that relationships happen more naturally and organically, as opposed to the old way, which they tended to just all be quick changes with one on-off triggers. So if you played it before, you could do a little meddling and you either suddenly made a friendship or not, right? You kind of just change things. Now they're going to evolve, they'll grow into each other. There's sort of multiple steps. Overall, a great change. And again, what it's doing and what a lot of these changes are doing is really focusing on making these wrestlers, these workers, these personalities, giving them personality, giving them character, something the game desperately needed to make these people not just numbers on a spreadsheet, but interactive and reactive to the world and themselves. The rest of the day had some minor updates, but there's some noteworthy ones that I wanted to call out that I think are nice features, one of which is the company tribute shows. So with the past games, you could obviously do a tribute show for a worker. Now you could do one for a company as well. So if you wanted to do something like a ECW one night stand, you can make that. Huge win for anybody that plays alliances. It was removed for no reason. I have no clue why, but cash talent trades are back. You have the ability to offer cash incentives during talent trades. It's returned to the game. It's got some inner workings and AI upgrades to make it smarter, more flexible. My guess is they removed it because it was almost like a cheat code. Owners and head bookers also got a bit of an upgrade here. It says the business and booking skills that each worker have now been upgraded in a way they function and change over time, giving them a more realistic feel and making them feel more consistent. They also hinted at it in the previous entry, but user avatars will now use those specific skills rather than having a separate reputation. So if you remember before, you had the ability to kind of go in and have industry veteran, industry leader, and you have your own little sort of RPG level skill system. That's been removed. Instead, we're just using the internal systems to kind of make decisions on how a character is going to react. That's interesting. We'll have to see how that plays out. And truthfully, it's not quite clear how this will work. I'm assuming this is for AI. It's to that theme of we're making it more realistic. We're making these characters' personalities. We're using sort of the systems that are visible to the player to make those decisions. First is AI backstage upgrades. So AI-controlled companies now have the same backstage events, locker room relationship drama, and morale-changing incidents as those run by the player, with corresponding stories on their website, meaning the game world acts and feels more alive than in previous games. Again, the theme, we're making the world more alive. This also means that the AI is more impacted by negative personalities than before, making it more of a level playing field for user companies. So in the previous game, truthfully, AI just cheats. I think we mentioned in the previous entry, but they just cheat. They don't have to deal with a lot of stuff. They don't have to deal with morale during booking. They don't have to deal with, I think, even crowd heat. They don't have to deal with backstage drama. You could add the most toxic individuals to a locker room and it wouldn't matter. Now it will. Now with that, does that level of simulation also come with some drawbacks? My initial concern reading this is sometimes the game really chugs the simming of a day-to-day event. They've made some improvements over time, but it still sometimes can be a slog, and my hope is that it doesn't do that. Otherwise, great update. Seasonal weather effects were also added, and this is kind of an interesting one. So localized weather effects now occur and impact shows, such as lowering potential attendance or stopping out-of-town workers from reaching the venue in time due to the chaos of travel. There are multiple types of weather events ranging from flooding to wildfires. These are locked to certain seasons in certain regions for realism purposes. So you're going to see maybe tornadoes in the Midwest in the United States. You're going to see wildfires on the West Coast. You're going to see blizzards, in the Northeast. You're going to see hurricanes in the Southeast. A cool update, and that's going to lead into a later day. But again, making the world more alive, that's a good add. Day 13 has a lot of nice quality of life changes to highlight. The first being enhanced narratives. The narrative feature has been greatly expanded and upgraded in order to give database makers a greater degree of control over the game and allow a wealth of new options. Firstly, narratives can now be set to take place over a span of dates rather than just a specific date. So for example, if you wanted it over a 2 or 3 week span, you could do that. Each day within that span, the narrative could potentially occur, and that's based on a chance of happening percentage. So it'll guaranteed will happen within that week, but you don't necessarily know when. There's no limit to how large or short that span can be, and you can of course set it for both the start and end dates to the same date in order to sort of fix it on a specific day. So just gives a little bit more control, which is nice, and allows for some more variety in sort of world events if you're playing a historic save. Secondly, the narrative requirements now work in the same way as narrative effects. In other words, you can add as many or as few requirements as you want, rather than just having a restricted set like you did in the previous game. This means, for example, you could set it so that multiple different companies or workers need to be in certain conditions in order for the narrative to trigger. A really nice addition also is Ultra and Super Spillover. To improve the handling of foreign stars, workers who reach high levels of popularity within a particular game area are now eligible to receive the bonus Ultra Spillover or Super Spillover into foreign markets. So, whether these are active or not can be set by the current era. So if you are, playing a very closed, like early, 1950s era, 1940s, 60s even, you could set it so that that doesn't happen, and because people don't have the access and visibility. But if you're playing a modern era, you might want to have it on because things are easier to see, like different wrestling promotions from all across the world than it was, in 1955, right? So the example here of how this would work would be, if you took a real world example like Shinsuke Nakamura, when coming into WWE, they would already have a fairly decent amount of pop because of their status in Japan, as opposed to coming in with hardly any. So this ultimately allows you to simulate sort of those major foreign stars being able to come into other markets without requiring them to kind of start from the ground floor. Some other quick changes I just wanted to highlight very briefly that I think are notable. One of which is that they added more products. Unfortunately, there's no indication that we're going to be able to make our own products, and that's a huge disappointment. I suspect that they don't want us to be able to make sort of the quote-unquote perfect product that doesn't lose any of those restrictions, but I think there's ways that they could have accomplished this and still had that sort of, like a yin-yang effect of a cost and benefit analysis for every decision you made. Perhaps we'll get that in a later one, but I think if you're looking for that, I wouldn't hold my breath. I would be really shocked if we get a major update to being able to produce your own products with this, but maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised. In addition, they made some changes to loyalty. In the older games, it was very hard to sort of steal a loyal worker, but you kind of by design. They've made that a little bit less restrictive, so there are certain circumstances when faced with like a really attractive offer, they may be willing to break the bonds of loyalty and leave their home company to head elsewhere. They also made another addition to the investment screen, adding charitable donations that you can kind of pay out to get morale boost and other benefits. The amount donated and the cause chosen affect the potential boost available and are available for how powerful they may be. The amount donated and the cause chosen affects the potential boosts that are available and how powerful they may be. So this gives something else for companies to spend their profits on. AI companies will also make use of this. Getting money in the game sometimes is too easy once you get to a certain level, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, but hopefully this is sort of a sign that some of those finances are being reworked to make it more difficult. But if you do have a surplus, you now have something to do with it to kind of offset some of the negatives that you may be dealing with. Be nice to know if maybe that can blow up in your face, donate to a charity and then have a low risk of some type of controversy for doing it if they are exposed as being like a scam or skimming the money or something like that. That would be kind of a nice, interesting little feature just to not make it sort of a dump money to make game easier button. Day 14 adds career goals. Again, another interesting change to add a little more flavor to these workers. This is something that's been requested pretty often in the suggestions on the Grey Dog software forums over the years. Every worker can now optionally have a specific career goal to work towards. Whatever their current goal is impacts their behavior within the game world, such as affecting who they want to work for and how they evaluate contracts. A worker's current career goal can alter over time as his or her circumstances change and can also be preset via the editor. The selection of possible goals include basic ones like fame, money, stability, those that really affect their contract demands. More general desires like social, for example, wanting to be with their friends, or wanderlust, wanting to explore the world, or novelty, working for companies that they've never worked for before. Those that relate to how they see themselves contributing to the game world. So for example, ones like entertain, to wrestle, to achieve hardcore notoriety. These series of goals that relate, and the series of goals that relate to them wanting to work in specific regions. Each goal has 1 to 3 levels, with the higher level having more impact on their decision making. So, if you have a money at 3, that's going to matter more than if they also want to, be a Japanophile and wrestle in a Puro company. They might want that, but they really want that money more than anything. And that's going to override that decision. These new goals add to the realism and make characters feel more three-dimensional. As they change from game to game, it also means that you'll see more variance about which companies different workers end up working for. So less restrictions in alliance loans. So in previous games, restrictions on how many times within a set time frame the same worker could be loaned via the alliance and how many times a company could loan workers from a specific other company. These restrictions have been completely removed from the game. This is going to be making alliances way more useful and opens the possibility of much heavier use of outside talent on the show, but the AI does take into consideration this sort of new, more open alliance structure and will be generally more proactive about working with their alliance partners. Great addition. Alliances were way too restrictive, not realistic at all. It was very difficult to put anybody into a loan for a long period of time, and ultimately it didn't really make it worth using them. I mean, you would use some people, sometimes you could use the one-time offer. After like the 4th or 5th time, you couldn't get any more people until like 6 months from play. It was really, really restrictive and it just wasn't fun. So does this make alliances maybe overpowered? Possibly, but I think it makes it a more fun experience. Day 15 closes up the week with a bang. We have a lot of changes, some of which I don't know about. Well, we'll talk about it here at the end. Pre-show build-up is the big change from this day highlighted. When the users enter an evening phase to book a show, what they now encounter has been totally redone in order to make it a little bit more structured and to remove some of the annoying loopholes or immersion-breaking logic issues previously present in the game. This takes the form of 7 steps taken in sequence with a clear purpose to each. Step 1, you choose which workers you want to give the night off to. This is the first option they can choose, or it's sort of to simulate, that they already planned on doing it. You can choose to send people to home that night. Say, we're not going to use you and stay home. If people are given a night off, they're unavailable to book for that show, so you have to make that decision wisely, but they won't have any impact on the locker room. They won't complain about being left off the show. And because you've already told them in advance that they're not needed, they are free to work any other show taking place that night, whether for a company they also work for or an independent gig. This can be useful if you want to keep bad influences off the show as much as possible, or as they highlight, if you have wrestlers that you want to use eventually, but maybe you don't have a plan for, you can have them gain experience elsewhere and sort of avoid them being upset about not being used as well. Anyone you don't give the night off to is considered to have traveled to the show and is currently backstage. Next is venue selection. The only difference between how it worked in the previous games and now is that once you've chosen a venue, you cannot go back and change your mind later. The game will take into account where you've selected it, and the reason why is because there's an expansion of sort of pre-show incidents that will take into effect your location, the weather effects, who's there and not there, etc. So it kind of makes sense why they've made that change, but before you kind of could hop around and make that decision. Now you have to kind of lock into place. Same thing, you're finalizing the broadcaster the same way, and then we have pre-show incidents. This is a new section to take advantage of the fact that the game knows where you are in the world and what level of show it is. So for example, a pay-per-view, a TV show, etc. And doesn't have to worry about the situation changing out of nowhere. Pre-show incidents tend to involve your local environment, so this can be dealing with like previously announced weather conditions that we talked about in the previous day here. Workers who are flying in having transport issues, not being able to make a show, problems with the venue itself. So they can have, for example, like security alerts or equipment going into the wrong place. The idea behind the section is to make it feel more realistic and throw more spanners in the work occasionally to make you have to change up your booking. The previously mentioned booking team meeting will happen after that, and then your regular locker room incidents. So it's the same as previous ones, but upgraded. Because the game knows where you are and who's there, this opens up the ability to generate incidents involving workers from local regions. For example, you might get a local worker turn up requesting to hang out backstage with their friends, potentially in breach of your locker room rules, and you'll have to make a decision on whether to make an exception or not. Or a worker turn up backstage and ask if they might be given an opportunity to be on the show. There's also new incidents to add to those that you're familiar with. So expect just in general more incidents happening. Maybe not just the same, oh, they're playing a poker game, they brought a dog in, etc., etc. Additionally, because they now happen in sequence, it means the knock-on effects can occur. So your handling of one incident may affect what comes after. So the goal here is to have sort of a richer variety of things that can happen pre-show and in the locker room. Overall, the rest of sort of the steps pretty much are the same, but I think the big controversy potentially is sort of giving the night off. It's a nice feature, but it feels like maybe it's a clunky way to implement it. And I'm not sure how I would have fixed it or how often I'm going to use it, because, you know, everybody books differently, but I like to kind of book on the fly. So the idea of choosing who's not going to be there sort of runs the risk of sending someone home and then realizing, oh, I actually need them because I need to do a thing, this person has a storyline and I forgot they're involved, etc., etc. Now, that adds decision making to the game, and adding crunchy decisions is nice, but also feels maybe a little finicky, and I feel like a lot of people might just turn it off or just ignore it completely. I could see a lot of times where I'm just not going to be sure that I'm not going to use somebody, and I might just choose to just keep everybody available. It's also not clear with this if being left off the show over long periods of time are still going to affect them, because it does say they won't complain about being left off the show, but I feel like if you are a person that's being called every week saying, hey, listen, I know, you know, we haven't used you last week or the week before or the week before that or the week before that or the week before that, but stay home again. I feel like eventually, especially if you're a certain star level, you're going to run into sort of a wall saying like, okay, I'm getting pissed off because I could be on TV elsewhere and I'm locked in here, right? Even if you're not locked in here, you still want to be presented. So I assume in that will still happen, but I'm a little concerned that it says that you can kind of just leave them off the show and they won't complain. I assume that's for small scale, and I assume that people will eventually complain. I hope. Otherwise, I think that might be a mistake, because it kind of just allows you to avoid consequences of your booking and your hiring decisions. Some other small additions this day are, you know, they're nice little reworks. They're not huge, but I wanted to kind of call them out as well. The first is block taping pay discounts. I don't do a lot of block taping, but for those that do want to run a like one-to-one realistic simulation, and you wanted to run 4 shows a day to work off the month, you now kind of have an advantage of doing that. Workers who are being paid per show and working multiple shows in a single evening can now work for discounted pay. You know, they're working more in exchange for less pay. Before, you did 4 shows, they got the full fee for each show, even though they were sort of recording them the same day. Now they get the full pay for the first show, they get 25% less for the second, 50% less for the third, and 75% less for any subsequent show. Again, talking about finances in the game, the entire finance system's been reworked. It's been redone in order to balance things better. They've taken several of the most popular databases out there and run long-term simulations with each of them to establish a system that broadly works for everybody. The goal is to make a system that works for every scenario, and, you know, it's hard to do, so I'm sure there's going to be some problems. But in general, what they've done is sort of tone down how much profit the major companies are making, in conjunction with the previously announced ability to alter the figures used in some of these calculations via eras. You're going to now have a better basis for a financial challenge. Because you can set eras, you can kind of set the standard for how much money generally companies are making a little bit easier than the general finance tab. You have a little bit more nitty gritty. In general, major companies are going to be not making as much money. I would hope that maybe it comes with more financial burdens as well. But at the very least, they're cutting sort of the profit that you would see. That kind of makes playing a larger company an easy button, which it really shouldn't. It actually should be like one of the hardest things to do. It should be sort of an inverse bell, where starting off as the smallest company should be one of the hardest things you do, and playing as one of the largest companies should actually be one of the hardest things you do, just in different ways. But finances kind of often make it where playing a large company is like the easiest thing you could play. They also made some upgrades to storylines in the game. When checking to see whether enough storylines have been furthered at the end of each show. The game now takes into account whether any of these storylines actually had dramatic stakes. So, trying to avoid people cheating in their angles. What this does is it looks to see whether one or more people had their success level changed. This is ultimately stop a loophole where you can just put a storyline in a holding pattern where nothing actually happened. In addition, they made some alterations so that very one-sided storylines where one person or side is completely and other dominant now leak heat over time to simulate how boring that would be for fans. So if you have like a large sort of faction and all they do is just win all the time and that's all that happens for like 3 years, that's going to kind of turn the fans off over time. It'll work short term, but over time you're not gonna get the same effects the longer and longer it goes. Again, just keeps things a little dynamic and makes it a little bit more interesting. Again, tons of other small tweaks mentioned in all these days, and I encourage everybody to go in the description below and read all of the journal entries from last week to see all of the small changes and tweaks that have happened, because there are numerous ones that we did not cover in this video. I just wanted to highlight the ones that I thought were important and interesting. What did you guys think? What are the interesting ones on this week's list that you are most excited about? What concerns you might have? It won't be long now because we will be able to play the demo next Saturday. So if you're looking forward to playing that, know that it'll be available for you. I will probably be doing a live stream on the channel that day when it releases. So if you wanted to check it out but didn't necessarily have the time to download the demo and you wanted to see things or ask questions, I'll be on there. We're going to be touring the whole thing. Probably going to try to convert a database and see how that works, play around with it, play around in the editor, and just see what features are available and how it all works out. So I will see you guys next Saturday. I'll see you guys for another journal entry. And that is it for this week. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.